have struck upon something that's been striking a chord with the American people. Let me just conclude with a few more comments about the present and the near future. The polls, as I think you know, suggest the Republicans will do well in November. In looking over the polls, which I've been following elections fairly closely for about the last 50 years, and people have been paying me to do it for 39 years. I've never seen a time when the Democratic Party has been in worse shape. If you look at the generic ballot, the question of which party's candidate you're going to vote for House of Representatives, Gallup has been asking this question since 1950. The Democrats are in worse shape than they've ever been. Gallup's latest numbers were, I think, at 1 point advantage for the Republicans. But that question tends to underpredict Republican performance. Republicans are actually in as good a shape. I should add that Republicans, I think, are not in the best shape I've ever seen them be. Democrats are in worse shape. Republicans are not in the best of shape. Republicans are ahead in at least 7 Democratic seats, including that of Rush Limbaugh's favorite, Harry Reid. They're in a surprisingly strong position in Illinois and California. In Illinois, where the Democrats have nominated a guy named Alexei Janulius, whose family bank, which he ran for a while, just went bankrupt, and he gave a lot of loans to mobsters. And I'm told that Senator Dick Durbin went into the Chicago Tribune editorial board and said, "Why are you guys so concerned about that mobster bank thing? Chicago. That's not so good." There is some indication in California that Senator Barbara Boxer may be in trouble. I guess don't call me ma'am. Thing there. And there's possible Republican chances in Washington against Senator Patty Murray, and in Connecticut, where, as of earlier this evening, Richard Blumenthal was still the putative Democratic nominee. The Democrats are ahead in no Republican Senate seats, but they have a chance to win some. It's really an outside chance for the Republicans to win a majority of the Senate. They'd have to pick up a net 10 seats. They're going to have to get very lucky to do that. But they're clearly going to pick up quite a few seats, including those formerly held by Vice President Biden and currently held by Majority Leader Reid. In the House, Republicans are making serious challenges to Democrats, according to one index, RealClearPolitics.com, on 106 Democratic seats. Democrats are making serious challenges in only 14 seats. But we did note that the Republicans did not win that Pennsylvania 12th special election. That was disappointing. That was about number 60 on their target list. They only need 40 to get a majority. But nonetheless, it was disappointing. The Democrat there was able, because he's not an incumbent, to run as pro-gun, anti-abortion, anti-health care bill, anti-cap and trade. That's going to be harder for the Democratic incumbents that have voted for cap and trade, the stimulus package, and the health care bill with the abortion funding in it. But I think that that does tell us something, that Republicans need to offer people something more to win than just, I'm not a Democrat. What it tells us is that anti-Obama feeling, opposition to Obama Democratic programs does not automatically produce votes for Republicans. And I think a lesson here comes from Britain, where I was 2 weeks ago covering the British election. I've been there for the last 4 elections, and I know a lot of the top people in British politics, and I go and interview voters when I can find a translator. Get some of you folks from North Carolina and with some of those people from the north of England, and you will need a translator. But But in Britain, the British Conservative Party over the last few years, like the Republican Party here, has been facing the question about what to do about a vast increase in government spending. The Labour Party, at first under Tony Blair, but in particular under Gordon Brown, first as Chancellor of the Exchequer and then Prime Minister, raised government spending for about 37 to about 53% of GDP, just a little a year. You know, the frog gets just a little hotter, but he doesn't get alarmed. And they've increased that. When Britain was prosperous, the Conservatives promised no cuts at all. They said, hey, we're not going to be portrayed as the hard-hearted party and taking benefits away from people. We'll keep spending just like Labour would. Then the recession hit. Budget deficit as a percentage of GDP is about 12% in Britain, a little more than it is here, but it's obviously very large. The Conservatives were very skittish about offering cuts. I remember discussing this with them last year in this. They were very nervous. We can't go too far. We've got to be cautious. They did propose some, finally, in their election manifesto, which are actually party platforms that have somewhat more teeth than they do with our parties, because they carry certain consequences in government. The House of Lords cannot obstruct any bill that was in the party manifesto once they win, and so forth. But they fell short on May 6th. They thought they'd win a majority of the seats. They had an unpopular Labour government in office. They failed to win the 326 seats vote in the House, majority in the House of Commons. They ended up with 307. And so they weren't able to form a government by themselves. They entered a coalition with third-party Liberal Democrats, which are quite left-wing on some things, but in fact they proposed more cuts in spending than the Conservatives have. And now they're putting some of the cuts into effect, and you know what? 66% of the voters are favorable, based on the initial reaction. And the lesson, it seems to me, and it's a lesson that I would add applies not just to the federal government, but applies to state and local governments as well, is that boldness works where skittishness does not. The lesson is that we're in a different point in our political history because voters understand that we have been seeing a vast increase in the size and scope of government, that there will be bills to pay, there will not be money there, that we are headed towards crisis, and it would be, as George W. Bush might have called it, a Grecian formula. I just thought of that one right here. That in that situation, voters are readier to accept something than they would have been under the ordinary circumstances. Just as during the recession, if you go to voters and say, you know, actually public employees shouldn't have a raise at a time of recession. I mean, President Obama last week placed a call to Jose Zapatero, the Prime Minister of Spain, and he congratulated Zapatero on his program, including 5% cuts in government employee pay. Now, when is President Obama going to see that in the United States? And I think it's a fair question. You know, we've got public employees getting raises when other people are losing their jobs. Senator George Lemieux of Florida said, appointed by Charlie Crist, incidentally, but not supporting him anymore, said that maybe we should just go back to 2007 spending levels. Maybe public employees should go back to their 2007 salaries and fringe benefits. There are a lot of people out there in North Carolina and America that would be happy to take what they were getting in 2007. And so I think then that the instincts, this is not a time when the instincts of the professional politicians are serving them well. And so, anyway, I think that it's a time for boldness. My instincts, my analysis of of the data, my analysis of the feeling around the country is that people are ready for a very significant and substantial alternative to this policies that we've been seeing, not just nibbling on the edge.